welcome to another YouTube clip, and today we're going to be talking about white balance, and in particular what white balance can do to help you take better photos. So today's video is mainly around SLR style cameras, like SLR style cameras being an interchangeable lens camera like this, but this can also be applied to small compact cameras that have manual control, or a small compact camera, or in some cases even phones that allow you to have access to the white balance setting. So let's talk about white balance for a second. What on earth is it? Well, white balance is basically your camera's way of determining what kind of light it is shooting in. In other words, what kind of light source is being used to light your subject. Now, as I'm speaking to you right now, I am using a couple of different light sources. First of all, I've got a bit of daylight coming in through my studio across here, a bit of daylight just through an open window. I've also got a light stand with an umbrella set up, which I'll cut to and show you in a sec. I've also got a little light globe up above me here as well, so it's sort of lighting my face this way. And you'll notice that the white balance, as you're looking at me now, the skin tones might be slightly sort of yellowed, maybe not quite right. Well, let me show you what this image looks like with a corrected white balance. So now you can see that, hopefully you can see that the skin tones are a little better. Of course, all monitors are different, but you should see a pretty big improvement from this to this. See what I mean? It should look slightly better, particularly with the skin tones. So where do you find your white balance setting? Well, on all cameras, of course, it's different, but I'm holding a Canon camera here, and Canon have a WB button set right here. So if I go ahead and change the white balance on this camera, you literally just need to, let me just get it onto a normal shooting mode. You just literally need to push WB and set the appropriate white balance setting. I'll show you a zoomed in close-up of that as I'm talking. And in the case in this room here, I would probably set the dominant light source to either an incandescent light or a tungsten light or a fluorescent light setup, because the globes I'm using in both of these lights are fluorescent lights. So I would set that to fluorescent. Now, if you're going out and taking photos, for example, in broad daylight, you might want to set a daylight white balance setting. So what you are then telling the camera is that the light that's being reflected off you is the light of the sun, which can be a very warm light, and you can counteract the yellowness or the warm look from the sun by setting your white balance correctly. Conversely, other lights have quite a cool light, or even what some people call a blue light, and generally speaking that is when you are in the shade or before sunrise and after sunset. And of course, when you are out taking photos before sunset, you are standing in the shade. You are literally in the shade of the earth because the sun hasn't come over the horizon yet. So if the sun's not up yet, you would do yourself a big favor by setting your white balance to the shade setting. Now the shade setting looks a little bit like this. It's normally a picture of a house with the lines after it. It basically denotes that it is shade. However, you'll notice your camera will also have a cloudy setting, and there is a difference, of course, between cloudy white balance and shade white balance. Shade means it's reflected light, in other words, light that's being reflected onto you from another source, and cloudy white balance setting is light that's being filtered through clouds. Now, what happens quite a lot when I'm at my shop, Ocean Grove Camera and Photo, and people come in to print photos, quite often they'll tell me that the colors aren't quite right when they're looking at the screen, when they're selecting the photos they want to print. And generally speaking, that's because the white balance setting has been left to automatic, which is basically guesswork on the camera's behalf, or they've set the incorrect white balance, for example, a fluorescent setting when the subject's in broad daylight. So just remember, when you're setting your white balance, it's all about what your subject is in, not the light that you're standing in, but the light that's being reflected from your subject. So experiment a little bit with white balance. So to that end, when it comes to changing your white balance, always remember to change it back as well. And it's a small habit to get into, but when you're going out to take photos, if you just look at the dominant light source that you're standing in, set the white balance appropriately, and if that light source happens to change, for example, if the sun goes behind clouds or your subject moves into the shade or you're shooting in the shade, just remember to toggle your white balance to the appropriate setting. It's not really a lot of mucking around, and actually it's quite an easy thing to do if you get in the habit, and photography is all about forming good habits. Now, of course, the big caveat on all this is if you are shooting RAW files, generally speaking, you don't really need to toy with your white balance too much, because you can always do that in post-processing later. If, however, you are relying on the image processor in the camera to handle the processing of your image, in other words, delivering you a JPEG file, it's always good if you can have a look at your white balance setting. If you do shoot RAW, I still do think it's a good idea to get in the habit of setting your white balance correctly anyway. Of course, before you can start playing with your white balance setting, you need to make sure that your camera is not in automatic. If your camera is in automatic, of course, the white balance is also in automatic mode. If you move your control dial from auto around to P for professional, of course not, it's P for program, but you will be more of a professional photographer, believe me, if you start using program mode a lot more. Program mode gives you access to changing things like white balance, ISO, etc. But white balance is really important, and it's really something that you're not really told about a lot when you buy your camera or when you're doing research into your cameras. Okay, so that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to the channel if you want to keep getting informative tips and tricks and hints about your photography. There should be a subscribe button underneath this video, and also give it a thumbs up and maybe a share if you like. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you for the next video.